Okay, so leading up to today, we have created a ground and we've established the Mississippi River. Last week, I very quickly blocked in the Capitol building, and then over the last week, and more specifically about 2 hours ago, I blocked in the rest of the landmarks that I'm going to focus on for Minnesota. If you're curious how I blocked in these objects, I did upload a quick time-lapse video that shows that. Now, the thing about blocking in these objects is that I'm not tied to actually using these meshes as my finished objects. It's really just a placeholder so that I can zoom out, look around, and make sure that I've got exactly what I want for establishing my space. Today, what I want to focus on is how to go from just a blocked-in building to a kind of finished level of detail. And we're not going to go hyper-real, photoreal detail. It's got to look good from, this far away, but we don't have to get right up in there and see, the keyhole on the doorknob of the front door of the lighthouse. We'll see the door. We'll see the windows, but we're not going to do that micro detail. We're probably not going to do rivets and bolts and things of that nature and hinges. But we do want to be able to establish what it is and what it looks like. So the first thing, as always, is finding reference. And so I just have open in a few different tabs, different angles on this lighthouse, and also a image that I will copy over to your desktop here very shortly. That is blueprints for a Split Rock Lighthouse, and this is especially useful because it shows the profile of the building that we'll use to, much like we did with the wine glass, to establish the broad strokes of the lighthouse before we go any further. So I'm going to pause real quick, copy this to your desktops, and then we will resume. Okay, so make sure you have your project set. So File, Set Project, Minnesota Infographic is what I'm using. It's set. I'm going to, when I have my my blueprints file is saved in the source images folder of that project. And I'm going to save a new version of this. So Command-Shift-S, save as. This is going to be infographic 02 _ lighthouse. Click save. Okay, so that's my new version. I do have this placeholder lighthouse I'm just going to ignore. We're really just going to start from blank. So I'm going to turn off my layers. So I effectively have a blank scene right now. My lighthouse reference image is from the side. So I'm going to go into my side view. And add an image plane. So I'm going to go up here in the viewport toolbar, this fifth icon over. This is my image plane icon. Because I have the Split Rock Lighthouse blueprint saved in my source images folder, it pops right up. Click open, and there it is. So now I'm going to position it. We'll set the ground right about there. Looks good. And then I'm going to slide it over so that the center of the lighthouse is in the center of the world. So I can line up the little spire on top there with the origin. Right there will work. And I'm not too worried about scale. That will be just fine. I will now set my alpha gain to, let's say, 0.4. 0.5, just so that you can see it a little bit better on the internet. And then new layer. We'll call this Lighthouse Reference. We'll name the image plane Blueprints, and then I'll set that layer as a reference. But that I'm not going to be modeling the inside of the lighthouse. I may model the inside of like the top glass area, but I'm not counting on it. We'll see how far we get in class, because recording and explaining takes longer than actually modeling. So I'm really just going to be focused on the outside forms. So I've got it in my scene. I've set it as a reference layer. Let's start modeling. We'll start with the primitive, as we normally do. And if we look at the lighthouse from a few different angles, let's just go through the thought process before I actually start pushing vertices around. The lighthouse is it's an octagon. All right, the main body, it's mostly even sides, I think. You can also search, so this is just searching for split rock lighthouse, but if you search for split rock lighthouse plans, that's how I found the blueprints. You also then find images like this, so you can kind of see, a bunch of different angles, which can be very helpful for laying things out and seeing how the building relates to itself. So we're going to start with a cylinder with 8 sides, and that'll be the main kind of column body area. The top of the lighthouse, we're not going to worry about this little safety fence. I'm not going to worry about the ladder. We'll probably just go kind of straight up and go straight up through the spire. Then we've got this little building outcropping. I don't know what it's called. It just says foundation plans. But that little outcropping building, we will delete some faces. Come on. Delete some faces from the side of the building and then extrude out the windows here. We're actually just going to kind of lay on top of the building. We might cut it out, but they're going to be a separate object from the main body of the lighthouse. However, the kind of this detail molding sort of thing will be in the same object. As far as the glass, if we don't model the inside of the actual light part of the lighthouse, then we will just make the glass a shiny light blue glass-like texture, and call it a day. So let's get modeling. So I'll add that cylinder. I will call this lighthouse. Actually, I will call it lighthouse body. So it's the body of the lighthouse, or tower. Either one. Doesn't really matter. We're going to set our inputs. Subdivisions is going to be 8. And I think everything else looks pretty good. I'm going to jump into perspective view here real quick. Actually, I'll go to the top view, and I'm going to delete the faces on the ends. So go into face mode, just click and drag across and hit delete. And in perspective, you can see what that looks like. It's because I don't need faces on the bottom, and on the top, I don't want a bunch of triangles, and so I will just adjust those when I get there. So I've got that. Up next, I'm going to back in object mode. So this cylinder by default is 2 units tall, and I want the bottom to be sitting on the grid floor, the plane. So I'm going to move it up 1 unit, and now it is sitting exactly on the grid floor. Okay. Now I'm going to go into edge mode, and this is where we'll probably be spending most of the time. Edge mode and side view. And like I said, this is going to be a lot like the wine glass that we did in class. Is it's going to be extruding and scaling in one view. Whoops. I'm going to do this in perspective because I only want to scale it along the X and the Z. There we go. Okay. I'll select this top edge and move it down. Okay, so I'm just defining that first edge. It's actually probably going to be easier to do this in perspective now that I think about it. All right, and so just with this top edge selected, I'm going to extrude it, hit R to scale it, and just scaling along the X and the Z. All right, I don't want to change the height. I will scale it in to there. Hold down Control, so you get a little bit more, finesse in your scale. And I'm just lining it up right here along the edge of the blueprints. The kind of the peaks. So any of the corners is going to be an extrusion, and then it gets a little bit more round here, so there might be a couple of extrusions to define the curve. But it's just kind of that process over and over again. And remember, in Maya 2018, now you can hold down Shift and just left click and drag to extrude. So you can do that with the scale as well. Hold down Shift, left click and drag. Scale, something like that. It doesn't have to be 100% perfect. Okay, this isn't necessarily going to be an architectural rendering. This is just to get the shape and give you some experience with this type of modeling. Whoops, you need to extrude, so Shift, left click and drag, scale it in. Maybe scale that in just a little bit more, so I'll hold down Control so I've got a little more detailed adjustment, something like that. And extrude it up. Okay, and again, I'm just following this edge. And then I'll extrude it up again, and this time it's an extrude and a scale, so move and a scale, something like that. I'll go up to there. Extrude it up to there and scale it. Right to there. Okay, now this is one of those points, this rounded bit is one of those points where I'll need a couple of edges to define the curve. And I think the way that I'm going to do it is first I'm just going to extrude straight up the whole width of the curve. And then I'm going to add Insert Edge Loop tool. I'm going to set it to 2 edge loops. We'll add them both at the same time. And then I will scale those out to define that curve. And I might actually scale them vertically apart from each other a little bit too. Something like that. All right, so I got that curve defined. Let's keep moving along. And it looks like this next part is just going to be scaling it in. So I'm going to hold down Shift, click and drag, move that in a little bit. Now it kind of looks like at this point that's a pretty small little step extrusion, I think. Yeah, all right. Get that out of the way. This is where finding nice high-resolution reference images is great. This one is only 1,000 pixels tall, so certainly there's room for more detail, but it'll get the job done. There we go. And I'll extrude and scale that again, just a little bit in. Oops, a little more. There we go. Okay. So at this point, you might notice that my reference image isn't lining up on both sides. And that's okay, as long as it lines up on one of those sides. Although it seems like I've drifted off from both sides. So, I'm going to select my reference image. Go back in object mode, select my reference image, and I'm just going to nudge it over so that one of the sides lines back up. What about there? And then carry on. Alright, so now that I've got my reference image line back up, go ahead and select my leading edge. This is the big extrusion up to here. Oh, I see why that... No, we're good. Okay. Up to about there, scale it down. Okay. Then I'm going to bring it up to here, scale it out, extrude it back up, another extrusion, scale it. I know it's a lot of rinse and repeat here. Extrude again. Alright, we've got another rounded bit, so we're going to do the same thing. Extrude past the whole thing. Shift right click, insert edge loops. And because the tool settings are remembered, I don't have to go back and change them again. I can just add my 2 loops. And I will scale them out along the X and the Z. And then scale them up. Whoops. Not move, scale them up in the Y direction a little bit as well. Okay, I can carry on. Extrude that up a little bit. I'm probably getting into the slightly too much detail realm here, but we'll be okay. Alright, back up. And then up again and scale it down. Okay, I'm just tracing the outline. All the way up to here. Scale it out. Oops, there we go. Now it looks like this is a little bit of a rounded piece. Oops. Kind of, it's like a quarter round piece. So again, I'm going to kind of scale it out to the end of that rounded bit. Add a couple of edge loops. And I'm just going to move them up. And then I'll scale them out. Just in that direction. Hold down Control. Yeah, it looks alright. Alright. This one isn't a perfectly even half or quarter round. So here, I will just do this one edge at a time. Get up to the peak there. Alright, I'm just gonna call that good. I don't think I really need to worry about that too much. Yeah, that's fine. All right, so I'm going to take a step back here, and I've got a pretty good looking lighthouse so far. Up next is we actually have to get this platform kind of on the top of the lighthouse. So let's actually just keep extruding. Again, because I'm going to make this part all one object. And I'm just going to extrude the height of the platform itself. I'm not going to worry about the fence. Once I get the height, I'll extrude this in and just scale that down. So there. This is the glass section. Now, if I come back later and decide that I want this glass section to be a separate piece, that's fine. I can select those faces and separate them into their own object. Okay, just like you can combine meshes, you can separate one mesh into multiple different objects. I don't think I'll need to do that, but I just want you to know that you do have that freedom. You're not locked into this being one object right now. So I've got that, and now we've got this kind of, we've got a concave section there, and this isn't lining up exactly, but we'll go with it. So here's another way you can get kind of little bits of detail. Like if I want just a solid ring here, I'll extrude all the way up to here, is I can go into face mode, select one face, hold down shift, double click on the next face over, it'll select that whole face loop. Okay, see if I go into wireframe, I've got that whole loop selected. And then from there, you can extrude that face, and then I'm just going to scale that out. Again, just on the X and the Z, I don't want to scale it in the Y-axis. Okay, and now I've got this little outcropping. It's the same effect as the other way that we were doing it. It's just another way. So, like if you need to go back and add this detail in, that's how you can do that. And then for this little concave portion, back in edge mode, shift right click, insert edge loop, again, undo that. Add the two edge loops, and then double click on both of them, scale them in. It's actually fairly shallow, so that will work. Okay, I am definitely drifting away from my reference, but that's okay. Extrude it up, almost done. That'll work. Alright, I'm going to simplify this little top bit. So we'll just do that. Now, I don't want this to be a sharp point at this transition, so I will extrude up a little bit of a face here before I do this top extrusion. I'll go all the way down. Yeah, I am way out of alignment. I bet, I don't know about betting, but the reference may not be perfectly lined up. So you just have to kind of compensate and do the best you can. Again, I can go back to that reference and move that around. If we look at exactly the side view. Go back into, go back into object mode. Now I can select my reference image and just kind of bump that back over. That works.
Except for the glass.
Done blocking in the vast majority of this lighthouse. Let's, shift. All right, we'll extrude that up. And then we've got another concave section here. And actually, if you look on an actual photograph, it doesn't look like it's quite as even as it is in the blueprints. Kind of looks more like a chess pawn than a perfect, like, even concave. So let's see if we can't... Alright, so that'll be a little bit smaller. And then, again, a couple of edge loops. Scale them in this way. That looks perfect. Alright, then it looks like it comes to a little bit of a peak, so I'm going to extrude up to here. Insert another edge loop, but this time I just want one edge loop, and I want it exactly in the center, so I'm going to keep it on multiple and just set it to 1, and that will add an edge loop perfectly in the center. I'll scale that out. And then, again, the photo that I'm looking at of the lighthouse does not exactly match the reference image. Okay, because here, as it's leading up to the sphere, we've got that little peak, and maybe there's a small vertical section, but this feels like it has more of a platform. So I guess we'll just follow the blueprints. Again, it's not super critical. Just trying to get the rough shape figured out. So I'm going to extrude up to the top of the sphere, and then I will add some edge loops. And let's do 3 edge loops this time. Add them in, scale along X and Z. About there, and then just select the middle one and complete that spherical shape, something like that. Alright, last little bit is getting the spire, so I'm going to extrude that up a little bit, scale it in. Looks like that needs to go up a little bit more. Scale it in a little bit more. And then extrude all the way up. It does taper, so we'll scale it down a little bit. And the last thing we need to do is cap that off. So I'm going to turn off my reference image, hide my tool settings, and I'm just going to cap this with a couple of faces. So just going to select one half of the faces and whoops, nope, that's not going to work. I'll just bridge across here. Bridge those. And I want these actually all to connect as one face. Actually, let me undo that. Here's a faster way. I'll select that whole edge and I will fill the hole. Now that leaves me with an 8-sided face, so I just need to cut that face in half. So I'm going to bring up my multi-cut tool and just click on opposite vertices and hit return. And now I've got 2 4-sided faces. Nope, that's 5 sides. That doesn't work. That doesn't work at all. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Just kidding. We'll do it this way. I will select those edges and bridge those. We'll select those edges and bridge those. We will insert an edge loop, just one, right there. I'm going to scale that down just so it gives these next edges somewhere to go, or these next faces. Come on. Zoom in. There we go. And then I can fill these holes. Now I've got four-sided faces. Okay. So there is the broad strokes of the tower of the lighthouse. Up next, we need to look at the connecting building. So if you have happened to have scaled your lighthouse in a non-consistent and symmetrical way, like you accidentally only had, one of the handles, only you scaled it in X and not Z, or Z and not X, there is a tool that will help get it back to a perfect circle, and that is in the polymodeling tool shelf, this button right here, Circularize. So you want to select that edge loop, and click Circularize. You've got a bunch of options, but by default, it's now a nice, clean circle. So we've got the tower of the lighthouse done. Now we need to do the little building outcropping off to the side. And using another reference image, specifically this one, we can see that that building extends from one of the flat faces of the lighthouse, which means we need to orient our lighthouse so that it can do that. However, the way that we modeled this is we have the point at the end. So we need to rotate the body of the lighthouse. And it's 8 sides, 360 degrees, which comes down to, I believe it's 45 degrees per angle, right? But we don't want to do a full 45 degrees because then we'll just add another point. So we actually need to do 22.5 degrees. I don't know if that makes sense. Let me try to explain this a little bit better. All right. We want to rotate this so that instead of an edge, we are halfway between. All right, so we need to figure out what this angle is. 360 degrees in a circle. We did 8 sides, so 360 divided by 8 is 45. But we want half of it, so half of 45 is 22.5. If you're not good at math and that just does not make sense to you and I'm explaining it poorly, there's another thing that you can do. Select your object, go to Rotate Y, and just middle click and drag until you're close, right about there, and assume that's going to be close to a whole number. So then you can just type in, see it's almost 22.5, type that in, and you're golden. There are also various online calculators and iPhone apps and presumably Android apps that will do trig and other geometry-based calculations for you, should you need them. But now that we've rotated that to the side, we've got a slight problem in that our lighthouse now looks kind of skinny because it's not lining up with our reference image. So now I'm going to scale just along the X and the Z. All right, again, make sure that you're scaling in both those directions but not in Y, and get that to line back up with my reference image. So about there. Let me do this in all views so I can make sure we're lining up right. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Okay. Just a minor adjustment there because I wasn't completely paying attention earlier. That works. So now we've got a flat face that we can extrude this building out from. And actually not extrude. We will create that as a separate object. But I want to first I need to define that section because I still want a solid wall above where it juts out, but we need to have space for it underneath. And the reason I'm doing this as a separate object is because there's a lot of detail here and it doesn't line up with the kind of, I don't know, annex, if you will. So it's just going to be easier to do that as a separate object and I don't have to worry about the edge flow working together. So back in my lighthouse, I'm going to insert one edge loop. let's go edge, select an edge, shift right click, insert edge loop tool, and I'll just do equal distance from edge. And I'm going to add it right at the roof of the annex. You can see I was a little bit low. So I'm going to go to slide edge tool, middle click and drag. And, oh, come on. Okay. No, we're not. Oh. There we go. Oh, nope. Just kidding. I don't know why this is acting weird. Perfect. Ish. That'll do. Okay, so now that I have that defined, I'm going to face mode. I'm just going to click and drag, select all those faces. Oops. Let's make sure we're not selecting the other side. I'll rotate around a little bit so I don't select the faces I don't want to delete. There we go. So I just have that side and hit delete. Lovely, perfect, excellent, good. All right, so now that's defined, and I can move on to my annexed building. All right, so now I'm ready for a separate object for the house or annex. This is the general shape of it. So I'm going to start with a cube because that makes the most sense to me. So I'll move it over. And I don't need any faces on the bottom, so I'll delete that bottom face. And I want it sitting on the ground, so I'm going to, go back into object mode. And just move it up 0.5. So now it's on the grid floor. And if you look at images of Split Rock Lighthouse, you can see that the ground that it's on is not even. But we're going to even it off, and then when we actually place it on the map of Minnesota, we will extrude those lower edges down to cover the terrain. Okay. But for now, we'll just keep it as a flat base. Again, it's great having two monitors for 3D because you can have reference open off to the side. All right, so let's look at this from a few different angles here. Uh-oh. That got a little messy. You can see that I somehow managed to not scale evenly. There we go. It was when I rotated the lighthouse, I scaled it only in one direction and not two directions. I did the same thing that I cautioned you guys against. You can see it's easy to do. So we'll go to there. That's better. If we look at it from all views, it's still a circle. All right, so I got to quickly go back in, add an edge loop right there. Oops, didn't quite go in the right spot again, so I will slide it up. I don't know why it's sticking right there, but close enough. All right, now I can go back to my faces and delete those faces. Okay, good. Now I will add my cube. This will be Lighthouse Annex. I'm going to move it up half a unit, 0.5, so that it's sitting on the grid floor. We'll move it over, go into face mode, and delete the bottom face. Okay. And I want this centered with the lighthouse. So I need to go back to my channel box. I got a little careless with my moving. And I want the X direction to be 0. So translate X 0. Now it's lined up on the grid. Okay. So if we're looking at our reference images, and we're not going to bring it in as a actual image plane, I'm just going to keep it open on the other monitor. You can see that it's like a little hallway that leads to the annex. It's almost exactly as wide as one of the sections of the lighthouse. So we will establish that scale, extrude it out a little bit, and then we've got this big cubic, roughly cubic area that lines up with about halfway through this facet. So those are kind of our key marks that we'll be paying attention to. So in top view, again, I'll go into face mode, select all the faces. Let's scale it up. It might actually be easier to establish the body of the annex first. Scale in this direction. Like I said, it's roughly a cube. This doesn't actually seem to be lining up perfectly. Something like that. I'll move it away. Yeah, this blueprint is not lining up with this blueprint. Exactly. We'll do our best. Actually, I think it just needs to scale down a little bit. So something like that. That'll work. Yeah, that works. Okay. And then take that top face, move that top face up to there. That works. And then now we need to get this hallway, so add a couple of edge loops there. Oops, edge mode. Before I click, insert edge loop. I'm going to do 2 again. All right, there. And then I want to scale them apart so that they line up with right about here, right about this corner. That'll work. Okay, so now I'm going to delete that face. I'm going to turn off my reference. It's just getting in the way right now. So now I can select these edges, and I'll just extrude them into the lighthouse. Oop, and I've got some faces on the bottom I don't need. Oh, I see. I accidentally selected all of this, and I only want these 3 edges. Extrude those in. Okay. So we've got a little bit of a gap. Oh, it looks like those need to move in a little bit. We've got a little bit of a gap right here, and what we'll do is extrude these kind of over and flush to kind of cap off that hallway. And we want a little bit wide up here. So I'm going to select, go into top view and vertex mode. Oops, don't do that. Vertex mode. And select these middle vertices, and I'll just scale them in ever so slightly. Check this from all views, make sure that we're good. Oh, we can scale out a little bit. There we go. Okay. So that is roughly what that building looks like. Cool. Let's define this just blank cube-ish thing right now. I turn my reference back on, and let's go into side view here. So we've got this bottom half detail that we want to define. And if we look at a picture of the lighthouse, like this picture of the lighthouse, we've got these vertical pillars established. I'm not going to worry about those right now. I'm just going to worry about kind of this bottom almost pedestal and this top crown molding sort of situation. Then we'll go back and deal with the those vertical pillars. Okay, so we're going to create this bottom detail the same way we did with the lighthouse, the tower section. I'm going to do this in quad view so you can kind of see a few different angles of what's going on here. But I'm going to insert some edge loops. Okay. So I'm going to, let's see, I'm going to work in solid view, in perspective, and wireframe in my shaded view. And this isn't lining up exactly, but I'm going to use it as like a reference and not worry too much about being exact with it. And I've got equal distance from edge from my edge loop, and I'm just going to add, let's see, we'll add one right here. Okay, this is where it turns out. And everything below it is kind of in line with it. So now I'm going to, let's add one more edge loop right at the bottom of that peak. Okay. And now I want that edge loop and the bottom edge loop. Oh, okay. So when you double click on that bottom edge loop, it goes all the way up and around and selects. All right, hold on. Let's hide this tower. So I'm going to create a new layer for the tower. We'll call it Lighthouse. Click Save. All right, Lighthouse layer. That works. Save. And turn that off so it's out of the way. Okay, so when I double click on this bottom edge to select just the bottom edge, it also selects all of these edges that I don't want. So I'm going to go back through and deselect those, holding down Shift. Okay, good. And then I want to just scale those out along X and Z, right? Just this plane, just like that. Perfect. Okay. Let's go back into side view. Now we just have this little almost cutout that we need to define. And so for that, we're going to add a couple of edge loops. So insert edge loop. I'm going to add one here at the top of that cutout. I'm going to add another edge loop right here at the bottom of the cutout. Then we can go into face select mode. Oops. Face select mode. I'm going to say extrude face, and I'm going to set my thickness to whatever gets me that right thickness. So I'll hold down Control right about there. So it looks like negative 0.08 for me. Your mileage may vary on that specific number depending on the scale that you're working at. But once I have that scaled in, so I've got that outcropping defined, the last little bit is this bottom edge. Zoom in here. There we go. As I just need to do this in side view, bring that up. Okay, so now we've got, it's flat on the top and it's sloped on the bottom there. Okay, you can see that goes all the way through. So that's the bottom half of it. Now on the top half, we've got a little bit more detail, and probably can see it best right here. Or, see if we can find a better... Oh, that's a great picture of it. Right here. So we've got this little top detail to define next. So it'll be similar thing. I'm going to add a couple of edge loops first to define that section, and then we will scale and extrude accordingly. Blueprints are a little harder to understand it right here. So we're just going to have to do our best, I think. Okay. Well, we know we want the walls to be completely vertical up to about here. All right, because I'm looking right at the bottom here is where that detail starts. Okay, so now I've got that defined. Let's add I'll select that whole face loop. And again, to select a face loop, you select one face, hold down Shift, double click on the face next to it. I'll select the whole loop. And we will extrude that out a little bit, give it some thickness. So Shift right click, extrude face, thickness. Let's see how that feels. And that might be too far. We're going to go to 0.04. Okay, that works. And then yeah, these are not very clear, so I'm just going to approximate, eyeball a little bit. We'll go into edge mode and let's add some edges. So this is really hard to tell what's going on. All right, let's just go for it. Insert an edge loop right about here. And there. I'm going to extrude that face out. Oops. Insert, come on, another edge loop right about there. We'll scale that out just along the X and the Z. And then we'll just add a slight concave underneath. 2 edge loops right there. Scale them in. That works. Yep, okay. So let's hide our reference. And we'll turn our lighthouse back on so we can see that. That's looking pretty good. Alright, you can see there's going to be some cleanup to do over here. And it kind of looks like on the reference that it just butts up. It doesn't look like it's a super snug, clean fit there. So we'll do something similar. But right now, as we are kind of running out of time for lecture, and I've been droning on for a while, almost at an hour. The last thing that I want to show is doing these windows on the body of the lighthouse here. So I'm going to add our lighthouse annex to the lighthouse layer. Right click on layer, add select objects, and turn off the layer. Let's bring our reference back up. We don't really have a good shot of the windows. But if we look at the actual form, and again, these are just going to sit right on top. I'm not going to worry about cutting out the lighthouse. We can start with a cube, add a little peak, and extrude in for the glass part. So this should actually be a fairly quick thing to model. And it looks like the height is roughly... Maybe we do want to have the lighthouse visible here. It's roughly half of this section. So we will add a cube. We will call it lighthouse window. I'm going to roughly move it into place. Scale it accordingly. Again, I'm looking for about half of the height of this section. That looks good. I can delete that back face, so we're not going to see that. The rest of it, scale it down. About like that. I'm going to insert an edge loop vertically in the center. And we're going to bring up that peak right there. Whoa. No, I guess that is even. Let's turn off that reference. Yeah, that is even. Okay. Can go up a little bit further. Okay. Let's add another edge loop. Right about, I'm going to do equal distance from edge, right about there. And another one there. So, just to remind you how edge loops work, with equal distance from edge, it will be even to whatever edge you click closest to. So if I were to add that from up here, you can see how it's peaked. If I add it down here, it is even. Okay, and then I can add it down here to keep it even, and then slide it up to there. Okay. I want to give that a little bit of depth, so I'll select that face loop, shift right click and extrude it. Just do a little bit of thickness, a little bit more. 0.02 works. I'm going to do the same thing up here. Extrude face, 0.02. Lovely. And then now we just need to define our window. And so the window is actually two pieces. It's a top pane and a bottom pane, like you see on a lot of windows. And I want to define that with edge loops first before I do any extrusions. So edge mode, select an edge, shift right click, insert edge loop. And I'm going to do this from the side view. Let's add one about there and another just below it. Okay. So I'm going to select all of those faces in the center. And I want to extrude them and just worry about the offset. So I'm just going to scale them in to about there, defining the window frame. Okay. And then the top window section. Actually, just kidding. I want to grab all of it and we're going to extrude it one more time in a little bit. Then just select the top windows, extrude those in more, and the bottom windows, extrude them in just a little bit less. Whoops. Okay. So the top and the bottom section are extruded in two different planes, so there's a little bit more realism there. Okay. And so now, the last thing we need to do is just place it on the lighthouse. And the way that it looks like it works is we just make that lighthouse a live surface, much like we did with the surface the map of Minnesota. Select the vertices on the back side only. Oops. Only on the back side. There we go. And just move them back. Oh, that doesn't want to do that. Okay. Let's find a different way to do that then. So if that's not going to work, then we'll just do this the manual way. So in the side view, I can just move that back just like that. Just line that up. Oops. There we go. Okay. So now I've got my window on my lighthouse. And I want to do a few more windows. So I'm going to, let's see, I want to evenly duplicate it. So we do the same thing we did back on week 1 with the solar system. All right, I'm going to group that window into its own group. We'll say window duplicate, just so I know what that group is. Go to Edit, Duplicate Special. Whoops, undo that. Edit, Duplicate Special Options. Reset the settings, Instance, and rotate 90 degrees on the y-axis. So it's going to do every other face on the wall and 3 copies. And duplicate special. Alright, so now I've got windows everywhere. And on the actual lighthouse, this window right here doesn't exist, so I want to delete that one. Let's see. How do I delete just that one? Select it in the outliner. There we go. Duplicate one. That one gets deleted. So now I've got some windows around my lighthouse. Now, if I wanted to actually have cutouts for the windows, then what I would do is select a face, extrude the face, kind of scale it to the bounds of the window. Then I could extrude it in and delete that face and then I could model my face or model my window and put it over the top of it. And I would actually be able to see inside or have any indents. So like if we look at this picture right here, the lower windows actually go in past the surface of the lighthouse. So that's what you'd have to do for that section. For the sake of time, I'm not going to do that here, but I do want you to know how to do that. And then, yeah, again, we can do the same thing for windows here, and actually for the columns is you can just kind of make that little frame overlay thing and put it right on the outside of the annex. Let's assume that this is a finished lighthouse. I know it's not, but let's assume that it is. I'm going to group everything together. We'll call this lighthouse group. And I'm going to turn on my ground. I'm going to turn in my blocking landmarks too. And I'll take that group and position and scale it accordingly. So it's got to scale down, move up, and over. You can see I rotated this, so I'm going to, whoops, looks like group, rotate it Y 90 degrees. Let's go to my top view. So it doesn't have to be exactly where my blocked in model was, just close. Then we'll set it on the ground, turn off my blocking layer, and that works. Yeah, and then this is the point where I could come back in here and, you know, if these edges need to be lower, I can lower those individual edges. So that they actually sit on the ground. And there's my lighthouse.